So, the game theorists have been no stranger to getting commentated on, because some people are not big fans of how certain theories are set up. I've personally never watched those commentaries because I've always been of the opinion that 1, it's just a theory, and 2, they're usually made for fun. However, I'd be a massive hypocrite to say people aren't allowed to commentate on the guy. So, backstory. I've always been pretty chill with game theory, mainly because the videos I watched contained topics that interested me, such as FNAF and Zelda, and they more so served the purpose of providing background noise for me. So when MatPat created the Film Theory channel, I was like, hell yeah, movie content! And once again, I liked the stuff I watched, for the most part. And then I saw the How to Train Your Dragon theory. And now here I am. I'm skipping the first minute because it's just Matt making a joke about dragons with Stockholm Syndrome and then making note of the sequels that came out this year.
The chief. Burke is prone to frequent dragon attacks, so, like most people being tormented by a species of wild animals, they fight back. In one of the dragon attacks, Hiccup injures an elusive night fury dragon that he eventually names Toothless and befriends. Over the course of the film, through his interactions with Toothless, Hiccup learns that dragons are really just glorified cats that can be won over with beams of light, chin scratches, and dragon nip. One such sequel that premiered earlier this year was How to Train Your Dragon. Now, this is a franchise we've never covered here, mostly because I'd never seen the movies up until recently, but having just caught up with the franchise after a few really long flights, I'm finally sinking my teeth into these tales of Toothless. By addressing the biggest question that comes out of the whole theatrical empire. Not could dragons exist? No, not how do massive lizards fly? It is way more obvious than that. Today I am going to answer the question of how do you train your dragon? And the answer is not like you see in the movie. I mean, I know the movie makes it seem all magical and heartwarming, but when you look at the realities of what's actually going on screen, the entire premise goes up in flames. You should not train your dragon. And I'm not talking about, oh, dragon training would be dangerous because they'll eat you and they'll burn you with their hot fire. No, the entire concept of training your dragon is simply broken at a fundamental level, and you definitely shouldn't do it the way that Hiccup does in the movies. So saddle up, Vikings of questionable geographic origin.
Sure you want that kid running the village?
It is time to theorize. For anyone who was like me and missed out on this franchise, here's basically what you need to know for today's theory. Hiccup lives on the island of Burke with his father, the chief. Burke is prone to frequent dragon attacks, so, like most people being tormented by a species of wild animals, they fight back. In one of the dragon attacks, Hiccup injures an elusive night fury dragon that he eventually names Toothless and befriends. Over the course of the film, through his interactions with Toothless, Hiccup learns that dragons are really just glorified cats that can be won over with beams of light, chin scratches, and dragon nip.
I played this good bit out for context, but I will say, the part about dragons being giant cats, yeah, keep it in mind. It's gonna come back to bite him in the ass later.
Children in Burke society have to undergo a process known as dragon training.
I think it's time you learn to fight dragons.
You go first.
You get your wish. Dragon training. You start in the morning.
Oh man, I should have gone first.
And Hiccup skyrockets in popularity as his tactics serve as a non-violent model to follow for the rest of the village.
Okay, no, it doesn't. He finds alternative tactics to harming dragons because he doesn't want to, yes, but it's not a model for the rest of the village to follow. It's rather that they think he's good at taking them down. That mindset is also evidenced by what Gobber explains to Stoic once he returns, saying, and I quote, "He has this way with the beasts." Doesn't really mean that they know, yes, this actual stick figure has found a way to not show the dragons were massive cunts.
Now, let me make one thing clear. By the end of the movie, what we see aren't trained dragons, they're domesticated dragons. That may seem like a minor point, but it's actually a huge difference. You see, in the real world, we use a lot of words about animals interchangeably that aren't really the same at all. And when it comes to training a dragon, the difference between words like train and domesticate is the difference between getting you the world's most awesome pet and you getting personally barbecued to death. So let's get our definitions straight. To tame an animal is to take an individual wild animal and make that specific animal not afraid of you as a human. To train an animal is to get it to repeatedly follow a command. You blow a whistle, your dog sits.
Training isn't exclusive to tricks, though. Taking it straight from Google, training is defined as teaching a person or animal a particular skill or type of behavior through sustained practice and instructions. For example, you can train a dog to not jump up on the couch or to not eat until you give them a green light. In one of the Dragon Rider series episodes, the crew trains their dragons to come to them based on dragon-like calls, and in another, they teach them to do specific things based on hand gestures. And if the TV show doesn't count, the second movie shows Hiccup flying in his own suit, and Toothless shooting plasma blasts beneath him to boost him up higher. Pretty sure he'd been trained to do that, especially with Hiccup's comment before he goes airborne.
To domesticate an animal is the most intense of these three, and requires fundamentally altering the species over many generations via selective breeding, basically transforming it to behave the way that humans want.
So, by your own definition, these dragons aren't domesticated. Hiccup and the gang has had their dragons for approximately 6 years, which is nowhere near enough time to alter an entire species. Also, fully domesticated animals don't tend to revert back to their wild roots, given that they're, domesticated. Actually, I'll bet you like $10 that if you set your cat free, he wouldn't be able to survive.
So today we're gonna address the possibility of all three, but specifically focus on training, since, that's the title of the movie. Now, Hiccup, for all his supposed dragon knowledge, is not the example of proper training that the people of Berk should be following. What he does is dangerous, destructive, and worst of all, inhumane. Now, that may sound extreme until you take a second look at the events of this film without all the sappy, feel-good music. What happens to kick off this entire movie? Hiccup injures Toothless, wrecking his tail flap, an injury that completely grounds Toothless. Toothless. Dragon without parts.
Well, see, Hiccup never meant to critically injure Toothless. Yes, he initially meant to kill him, but found himself unable to do so. He didn't even know what he'd done until he asks, "Why don't you just fly away?" and then realizes that the dragon's tail is fucked.
So we are starting the relationship with a critical injury, and then it proceeds to get even worse. Hiccup moves on to reconstruct a new tailpiece for Toothless, and while it's all real nice and good that he worked so gosh darn hard on it, it was repairing an injury that was his own fault. And as soon as that tailpiece is on, guess what Toothless does? Does he turn around and thank Hiccup? Does he tearfully tell him that he'll miss their companionship? No! He flies away. He tries to escape the human predator, like a wild animal should and would do in that moment. But even then, Hiccup can't leave well enough alone because he hangs on through the air and discovers, super conveniently, that the dragon can only fly if he, Master Human, is controlling the prosthetic tailpiece. Just think about that for a second. This would be like clipping a bird's wings, then replacing its wingtips with remote control wingtips so he could fly him around like a model airplane. When you really think about what's going on here to a wild animal who's scared and injured, it would be immediately classified as animal cruelty, or at the very least, a pretty barbaric way to get a big animal to do what you want. And Hiccup sees no problem here.
Toothless tries to escape because he, at this point, neither knows nor trusts Hiccup. He didn't even want to be touched, so why the fuck would he be chill with the prosthetic if it wasn't for Hiccup luring his attention away from his own body with food? In the movie, he even moves his tail away until he literally shoves his face into the basket. So, yeah, it's no wonder he'd try to fly away. And as for the tail conveniently not working, I can't say this as a concrete fact because it's never stated in the movie or script, but I feel like this was Hiccup just throwing something together and then realizing the prosthetic doesn't properly function when the two almost crash. I would also like to propose that Hiccup clings to Toothless's tail, because if he didn't, he'd fall to the ground and likely break something. Actually, I'd like to think most people would hold on for dear life if they were stuck on a large animal and had the potential to get hurt. I know I would. And I have.
In fact, he spends most of his time riding Toothless around, congratulating himself about how amazing he is.
Yes! Yes! I did it!
After that, he goes on to chase down the dragon to get a saddle on it. Again, not voluntary, since Toothless will literally die if he can't fly.
I don't know what you saw, but I see Toothless acting like a playful puppy, knowing full well what's about to happen and deciding to mess with Hiccup for shits and giggles. Real-life dogs do this too, but with toys.
It then has to iterate all kinds of reins and turning systems to control the dragon, instead of rigging a system where, you know, Toothless could control it himself. Hiccup doesn't design or even attempt to design something that would allow Toothless to fly independently until the short film Gift of the Night Fury. And even then, he still has systems in place that allow him to maintain control.
So, I had to go watch the short movie to know what the fuck went on there. I'll give you this. Not thinking of designing a tail like that before was kinda dumb, especially since we know he has the brains for it. However, he comes up with making a tail that Toothless can control himself because the dragons migrate to lay eggs, and Roughnut, when Hiccup tries to assure his friends their dragons will be back, tells him, "Easy for you to say, your dragon can't go anywhere without you," which then gives him the idea to make Toothless more independent. Thing is, Toothless destroys the new prosthetic at the end of the movie because he wants Hiccup to ride him. Hell, he literally only uses the tail to fetch Hiccup's helmet, which he dropped into the ocean during the dragon migration. And as for the supposed mechanisms still in place to control him, where? No, I'm serious. Did we watch the same movie? Did I miss the part where Hiccup controls Toothless while he wears the new tail?
It's like saying to your dog, "I love ya, as long as I still have the ability to shock collar you." It's only in the third and final film that Hiccup finally respects this animal enough that he designs something that makes him completely independent. Meanwhile, every time Hiccup falls, Toothless crashes headfirst into the ground at full speed, or directly into cliff faces. Even when his control system works and Hiccup is managing to navigate, think about what's happening here. Sure, it looks epic and they're working like a team, but in reality, this dragon is a helpless passenger in his own body. He is a slave, and no matter how many times it happens, he only has one choice but to keep going. Because again, a dragon that can't fly is a dead dragon. The long story short here is that whether he had good intentions or no, Hiccup used force to train his dragon. He stripped away its independence, and Toothless was required to submit to it.
Again, Hiccup never meant to injure Toothless, but please, do go on to pretend that's the case.
So what should Hiccup have done to train his dragon? Well, it comes as no great surprise to anyone that it would at the very least be a lot harder to train a gigantic lizard than it looks like here. But is there any world where this is possible? Using anything even remotely like the real methods of animal training, could you train your dragon? Maybe there's a way that this story could have turned out better. Maybe we call it Film Theory's Guide to How to Actually Train Your Dragon. It's catchy, maybe it just needs an acronym. FTGHTATYD. So let's look at what Hiccup should have done if he were actually training a dragon, or any kind of reptile that even remotely resembles a dragon, because I want to give him a fighting chance here. Referring to reputable zoo and reptile resource guides, the FTGHTATYD immediately encounters a few issues other than its terrible name, because in most places you look that respond to the question of how do I train my reptile, they answer with, you don't. To quote Safer Pets, an online resource about training and caring for exotic animals, quote, "First, it's important for you to realize that your pet lizard will never be like a dog, or even a cat. You will never be able to have the same level of interactions and trick training as with a pet dog. If this is what you're after, then you might be better to consider a different sort of pet." Maybe not with that attitude, Safer Pets. No, but seriously, why are they so negative towards this whole thing? Is it just that we haven't spent the last few millennia domesticating our local crocodiles, and that's why they're not willing to play fetch? Well, no. It turns out that the problem with training your dragon, or any other reptile, starts with the brain. Have you ever heard anyone refer to their lizard brain? You usually use the phrase when you're referring to some impulse decision or reaction that you just can't control, like your involuntary reaction to a jump scare in a horror movie, or how I seem to eat the entire box of springtime Oreos before I even realize it. Every single spring, they're the basic Oreos, but I still am like, oh, they're yellow frosted, great! These are all primal reactions. It tastes good, so eat it. It's scary, so run away. These lizard brain actions are controlled by the three most primal areas of our brain: the brain stem, the cerebellum, and the basal ganglion, which aptly enough are the same areas of the brain we share with lizards, including reptiles. Reptile brains are just much smaller than mammal brains relative to body size because they only need to have these three areas. For reference, a saltwater crocodile and a horse have almost identical weight ranges, from 800 to 2,200 pounds. A crocodile brain weighs in at about 8.4 to 15 grams, while a horse's brain weighs in at 530 to 655 grams. So why are their brains so much bigger? Well, humans and other mammals like dogs and cats have other areas of the brain layered on top of those primal areas, called the limbic system, which allow us to have more complex emotions, like how dogs experience excitement to see their owners, or depression when they're abandoned. The limbic system also also enables us to develop trust and behavioral pattern recognition that allows us to train and be trained. Reptiles literally don't have the parts of the brain necessary to develop relationships with humans. Their brains are missing the emotional cognition to be trained to do the types of tricks that you see in How to Train Your Dragon. No, come on! I hear you saying there's videos on YouTube of people training lizards like Komodo dragons. Duh, they even have dragon in their name. But that kind of lizard training looks very different than training a cat and a dog. The most advanced dragon trainers in the world, who work with big lizards like Komodo dragons, can only train them to do what's known as target practice, lifting a rifle onto their shoulder and shooting at a target downrange. I just did that to see if you were paying attention. No, you cannot train your lizard to shoot a gun. Target practice here means basically classical conditioning for your dinner. Instead of throwing some mice or other animals into the reptile's habitat, trainers take a target, basically a ball or a plate on a stick, into the enclosure and train the reptile to touch the target in order to get its food. That's it. Like, that is the level of training that you can do for your dragon. The end. Biologically speaking, it is impossible to do much more than that. And the reason trainers typically even bother doing this is to help move reptiles to different areas of their enclosure to receive things like medical care or give them exercise, not become helpful pets or even show off for the zoo visitors. Reptiles in captivity are known for being lazy and lethargic because they don't have to defend their territory anymore. Their lizard brain is no longer needed for survival, so the only way to get them appropriate activity is to get them to work for their food. Even the crocodile hunter himself, Steve Irwin, describes using himself as bait in crocodile enclosures so the crocs would regain their sense of territorialism and fend him off to get their blood pumping. This is a very rudimentary form of training, and it certainly isn't for fun. It's because to keep the reptiles healthy, they have to use their instincts, because that's the only thinking that they're capable of doing. Anything you train a reptile to do isn't them being loyal to you, it's just them using an instinct. All that said, for all you reptilian apologists out there, it's important to understand the difference between intelligence and emotional complexity. Reptiles are extremely smart, so just because they're not emotionally capable doesn't mean they're not capable.
Here's where the part I asked you to keep in mind comes in. Matt says that it's impossible to train a lizard to do what we see the dragons do because they aren't emotionally capable. And he's right. However, the dragons don't really seem to have a normal lizard brain. Namely, because they do, in fact, have emotional capability. In the first movie, Toothless gets aggressive when Hiccup steps on his drawing and, as I mentioned earlier, plays around when Hiccup shows him the saddle. When Hiccup shoos the Simpleback back into its cage and tosses the eel, it reacts how I would react to a spider. And yes, that can very well be an instinct, but what I mean is that it reacts to the eel more like a phobia and less like something potentially dangerous. Towards the end of the movie, Toothless shows clear signs of fear and distress as Stoic sails to the Dragon Island. In the second movie, Toothless again acts like a puppy, showing off his new flapping spikes to Cloud Jumper, who's in turn not impressed. When Toothless is forced to kill Stoic, he shows sadness at being pushed away and yelled at, as he likely has no idea what he even did. In the fucking third movie, he falls in love with the Light Fury. However, because she doesn't like humans, she fucks off. And guess how Toothy reacts? I'll give you a hint. He's not happy. Speaking of the sparkling tapeworm, she's visibly confused when she throws Hiccup off Toothless and he goes to save him. When Toothless tries impressing her with whatever the hell that was, she's uncomfortable. He accidentally throws sand in her face and then proceeds with a weird mating dance, which scares her and causes her to smack him before flying away. She's then annoyed because Toothless continues to bother her. I don't know. Seems like emotional capability to me. And with that, I am done. From here on out, he just mentions that reptiles have good memories, they're smarter than us, and we wouldn't be able to train a dragon because we can't train a lizard. And I really don't have anything new to say to the last 3 minutes. So Matt, I usually like your theories, and you do seem like a genuinely nice person, but this... I did not like it at all. It was not good. You ignore that the dragons have a more complex brain than their miniature counterparts. You act as though Hiccup has malicious content when he clearly started their relationship because he wanted to help, and just seemed to think that Hiccup had it in mind to control Toothless. And I am aware that Matt makes these theories for fun and not necessarily because he thinks that's actually 100% real fact or whatever, but in that case, try not to sound as though you think you're right. Because, quite frankly, it really does sound like you're trying to expose us to the dark truth or something. But, that's all from my end, though. So, I'm out. Tools. I don't know what you saw, but I see Hiccup? What? Because you ignore the fact that the dragons clearly have more complex brains than their miniature counterparts. You ignore that the dragons very clearly have a more complex brain than their miniature counterparts. You act as though Hiccup has malicious content. Hey, intent. Dimwit.